zdjęcie. So, on to America, and let's see what happened when the music hall and the variety show reached the United States. Of course, everybody likes a good song and dance, so different kinds of variety shows started gaining popularity in America, mostly among the city dwellers, also coming from the working class, from the middle class. It wasn't a very posh entertainment like opera developed to be later in the 19th century. So some of the variety shows of the American origin that influenced the development of the musical as a genre would be vaudeville, revue, and extravaganza. They were quite similar. They are similar to the music hall in a way that they are not theatre plays. They are variety shows showing different performers doing their thing. The vaudeville was basically an American version of the music hall, aiming for the middle class audience, so a bit more respectable probably, with a slightly less sexual innuendo, although sexual innuendo has always been very popular in any kind of musicals. The revue was a bit more elaborate. Think of the early shows with the big stairs built on the stage, and dancers in skimpy clothes showing their legs and arms and sometimes even breasts parading down the stairs. This is really the revue. A very famous and very successful revue theatre in New York was Ziegfeld Follies. We'll talk about all these things, so if you hear about them for the very first time, don't worry, you'll hear about them again when we talk about the history of the genre. Now we talk about the predecessors. So we have those slightly more elaborate, slightly more expensive shows called the revue. And the extravaganza was the most monumental of this type of variety show. It could include hundreds of performers. It was like a show that would be performed on a stadium now, with lots of extras, with trained animals. So you wouldn't really concentrate on individual performers, but rather big groups of dancers or people marching, parading, I don't know, like exotic animals dressed in strange costumes. Sometimes it was, it combined elements of circus, but it would be even more monumental than the biggest circus. So you would have a lot of people, and the idea was to awe the viewer with the grandeur and perhaps even the expense of the whole thing. So as you can see, there were different shows for different budgets, and there you go. There were also other types of variety show, like the burlesque, which was definitely the most sexy type of variety show. Some say it was glorified striptease. So there was always some nudity expected, or at least partial nudity, or the performers who would normally be beautiful young women with curvy figures, they would pretend that they were undressing, and they will only cover the most strategic parts of their bodies for propriety reasons, basically. It was sexy, it was satirical, if you remember, all these subgenres still exist. Nowadays, burlesque is still quite popular. It's more inspired by the style of the 50s than the turn of the century, but it really starts in the turn of the century. It's just that the fashion of the 1950s proved to be more appropriate and more interesting for burlesque artists. So there we have the vaudeville, the revue, the extravaganza, and the burlesque. And this leaves us with one more type of show, which was specifically American because it was inspired, although not always in a positive way, by the cultural influx of the black slaves. Of course, if you know, in the 19th century, America, or parts of America, still had slavery, and there were many people brought from Africa and enslaved and forced to work mostly on plantations in the south of the country. After the Civil War in the middle of the 19th century, many of the former slaves moved north to the northern states, and again, perhaps it's a stereotype, but I think it's quite legitimate to say that those Africans or African Americans as they were now, because sometimes this was the next generation or the third generation of people who were brought from Africa originally. They very often had musical talent. Their culture favored music. Music helped the black slaves during their work, the hard physical toil, especially on cotton or sugar plantations. They developed their own styles, very characteristic styles of music. Some could be referred back to the tribal sounds of Africa, different places in Africa. Some of them would develop in the plantations, so the work songs, the so-called field hollers. So you would have very often the kind of call and response type of songs. So there would be like the leader of the working group who would start the song, and the workers would respond. So there were specific rhythms, specific sounds, and they had some names to them, like hot sounds or dirty sounds. It means they were not very clear in this kind of typical Western way in which clear articulation was highly valued. In time, they developed into Christian songs, especially spirituals, that were very important influence, also visible in the later musical theater. They still exist. Then blues, ragtime, jazz, and we'll return to jazz in the 1920s, but for now I would like just to draw your attention to the fact that the American popular music at the turn of the century was influenced, consciously or even not so consciously, by the culture and music of the African Americans. One of the ways that popular culture responded to this influence was a type of variety show called the minstrel show. And this is perhaps the only type of show that did not survive, or at least officially, to our times. Because now, when you look at it, it looks extremely racist. Extremely racist. The idea was that white performers would present songs and dances inspired by the black culture, in blackface. So they would paint their faces black. They were white Caucasian, as the Americans say, performers. They would paint their faces black, very often with kind of pronounced lips that would be left white or red sometimes. And they would parody the styles and sounds and rhythms of this music of the former slaves. So the kind of, goodness me, no. So the minstrel show parodied the characteristic features of the music and dancing of the former American slaves. The sounds, the rhythms, the specific movements that became characteristic for the African American style in music. But this was a rather nasty parody by people who were just making fun of those types and presenting them as savage and uneducated and silly. So if you see elements of the minstrel show, you basically know this is a parody. This is not an honest inspiration. This is a very nasty parody. And that is perhaps why the minstrel show has not survived into our times. So what I will send you together with the links to this video are a few things. So first of all, you'll get the little excerpts of the films illustrating what I talked about. Then I will send you the link. You can do it yourself. You can just go to a Wikipedia page about musical songs, and you'll see a hyperlinked list of some titles of musical songs, and I would like you to explore. I would like you to go and see, to listen to some of these songs and perhaps familiarize yourself with the genre. Also, for next week, I would like you to try and find any version. Film version from 1936 is my particular favorite, but if you find any other version, it's fine, of the musical called The Showboat. The Showboat. If you find it on some Polish site, it could be translated as Statek Komediantów. This is, in the opinion of many people, the first modern musical. As you can see, it's from the late 20s, so it's really early. But this was one of the titles that really changed the genre forever. The way it presented the subjects. There will be some racial subjects as well, so it's also quite interesting because of that. So that's, I would say, the required thing. The required thing is look at those links and watch The Showboat. Also, if you haven't done so already, register to the Moodle version of this course and see what's there. Not much yet, but there will be. And each week there will be a forum question or a few forum questions that you can answer, and this is something I would like you to do. The first question that I asked this week is to look for inspirations in modern musicals for traces of the ancestors. So all those genres that I've discussed today, can you find references to them in modern musical or in later musicals? Okay? This is of course mostly for those who are already quite familiar with the musical theatre. But if you remember watching something and it now kind of comes to your mind that there was an element of, I don't know, music hall in it, or an element of the extravaganza, or even of the minstrel show, there is a space provided on the forum. You can put it there, and we'll return to this, if not earlier than during the live meeting in a few weeks' time. If you are interested, because if you want extra material, there is lots of extra material. If you're interested, the films I recommend: Topsy Turvy, Miss Mary Lloyd, and Oh What a Lovely War. Perhaps with the special attention on the last one. So next week we'll talk about the typical structure of a musical, different types, different uses of parts of the performance, and see you next week.